The Trump camp has finally publicly acknowledged the failure of the military strategy in the war against Iran and admitted that the economic phase of the war could last for years, so they are ready to freeze the conflict.
Whether they can survive a couple of weeks or a couple of months or possibly longer.
US Vice President J.D. Vance stated that it is difficult to predict how long Iran can withstand the new economic sanctions from the US. But he immediately emphasized that the collapse of the Iranian economy is not actually the goal of the sanctions as such. Quote, "They are under tremendous pressure, and this pressure is in line with achieving our goal of ensuring that they do not have nuclear weapons. Whether they can hold out for a few weeks, a few months, maybe longer, as long as they don't have nuclear weapons. That's what we're focused on, and that's what the president has essentially already achieved. The question is, if it's already been achieved, why do anything further?" And literally at the same time, Iran responded not with a willingness to pause the war, not to freeze the war, but with a direct military threat and a sharp expansion of the war. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, hit like on this video, and please leave any comment you like. So let's start with the words of the US Vice President J.D. Vance, because in them there is an actual acknowledgement of a new format of war and an admission that the military strategy has failed. And all the promises to strangle Iran economically, it's all empty talk from Donald Trump and his Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. J.D. Vance stated that the idea of a new economic phase of the war is not to strangle the Iranian economy or to overthrow the Iranian regime, but simply to keep them in a state where they can't have nuclear weapons. Although, let me remind you, Donald Trump literally just yesterday said that the goal of the economic blockade is to strangle the regime and destroy it. But his vice president says no, we don't have such a goal. According to J.D. Vance, sanctions somehow guarantee that Iran will not be able to restore its nuclear program. Here is his quote. "If you look at the situation today and compare it to what it was a few months ago, oil prices have dropped significantly. Gasoline prices have dropped by 50 cents compared to the peak. We have demonstrated the ability to do something remarkable for our national security while also protecting the economic interests of the American people." If you didn't get it, J.D. Vance is bragging that Trump's team was able to handle it. Partly with problems that didn't even exist before Donald Trump's war with Iran, he says. Imagine, we lowered gas prices compared to the peak level. Yes, of course they haven't reached pre-war levels yet, but they did lower them. This is actually a super strategy of the most aggressive populists. You create a problem, then partially solve it, and present it as a victory. Look, just a few months ago gas was $4.50. Yes, before the war it was $3.50. Now we've lowered the price to $4. So that's a victory. It used to be $4.50. Everyone has already forgotten that it was $3.50. They've forgotten about that. Well, it was what it was. It used to be like that. Not anymore. It was $3.50. Forgotten. Then it became $4.50. We lowered it to $4. Super. Victory. We're really great, as J.D. Vance says. He says, we've done something amazing for our national security and the economic interests of the American people. Well, it's a circus to be honest, but still. Oh well, here's something else that surprised me. It's that J.D. Vance says that sanctions are a guarantee that Iran will not have nuclear weapons. So if that's the case, why was the war necessary? Yeah, if just sanctions are a guarantee that Iran won't have nuclear weapons, why was it necessary to move to a military phase? They could have just imposed sanctions, isn't that right? Or then you shouldn't use that fancy phrase that sanctions are supposedly a guarantee that Iran won't have nuclear weapons. But pay special attention to the wording used by J.D. Vance regarding the timeline for continuing the war against Iran in this new economic phase. Here's another quote from him. They are under tremendous pressure, and this pressure is in line with achieving our goal. To ensure that they do not have nuclear weapons, whether they can hold out for a few weeks, a few months, maybe longer, until they have no nuclear weapons. That's what we're focused on. And that's what President Trump has essentially already achieved. Once again, how do you like these phrases? There's no specific deadline. A few weeks, a few months, or maybe longer. Well, you know, that's just how it is. I apologize, there is a saying like srala mazala. Well, that's a saying from Ukraine. This is the language of someone who is not a winner. It's the language of a person admitting that the conflict is moving into a stage of indefinite economic strangulation with no clear end date. This is an admission from someone who says, I don't know what will happen next. We have this kind of plan, but we have no idea how it will all end. But we don't understand where we're heading. But let me remind you, at the beginning of the war in February, on February 28, 2026, both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance publicly assured that the war against Iran would not last more than 4, well, at most, 6 weeks. And I'm not making these numbers up. You can go yourself, find them, read them, watch the video where Trump says 4 weeks. Well, at most 6 weeks. And that nothing will be left of Iran at all. Yeah, we'll reduce it to dust, and that's it. That's all. Well, or Trump's team thinks that everyone has already forgotten about this. But what is this new phase that could last for years? The head of the US Treasury, Scott Bessent, stated that on August 24, he will present details regarding the planned sanctions against Iran, so this is already a prepared package that will be published soon. At the same time, Bessent himself emphasized an important caveat: the measures should not lead to an increase in oil prices. That is, even his own administration. The administration recognizes this fragile balance between maximum pressure on Tehran and the risk of hurting its own voters at the gas pumps. And earlier, let me remind you, Trump had already changed his strategy on Iran, focusing specifically on sanctions and waiting instead of military action. So, the shift to an open-ended economic war is already the declared course of the entire Donald Trump administration. But here Donald Trump is facing problems, because Tehran does not agree with this arrangement and these plans. Iran is fundamentally opposed to any pause and any freeze in the war. The chief of staff of the Iranian armed forces, Major General Ali Abdullahi, stated, and I quote, "The reaction of the Islamic Republic will be broad and decisive, with readiness on land, at sea, in the air, with air defense systems and in cyberspace. The Iranian armed forces will respond. Iran will take crushing, punitive and destructive measures." This is how Iran promises to respond to sanctions. As you can see, Iran is not going to just sit and wait for the sanctions to take effect. No. They say, you decided to freeze the war, but we did not make such a decision. You decided to use sanctions instead of missiles, but we did not make such a decision. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Baghir Ghalibaf, the country's chief negotiator at the mediation talks in the US, added his own assessment of the balance of power. Quote, "Washington understands that it will not win in a direct military confrontation. We must develop plans to fight against unfair sanctions so that we can overcome them." He also separately accused the US and Israel of waging economic and cognitive warfare against Iran. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran, for its part, stated, "US sanctions will not cast even the slightest doubt on the resolve of Iranians to defend the independence, dignity and national sovereignty of Iran." Let me just remind you that Iran has been living under almost continuous economic sanctions for nearly 50 years, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So, in other words, it's the very threat of another round of pressure. It's not perceived there as something new and frightening, but rather as a continuation of a long familiar situation that the country has learned to endure for decades. Bottom line. Vice President J.D. Vance essentially admits that the United States of America has no plan for a quick military victory or a clear timeline for economically strangling Iran. There is only a vague phrase, as Vance said, a few weeks, months, maybe longer. Formally, this is presented as an achievement, but in essence, it is a rejection of the original goal of the swift dismantling of Iran's nuclear program in favor of a prolonged siege. Well, in response to this prolonged siege, Iran is showing not the slightest willingness to agree to a pause or a freeze. On the contrary, General Abdullahi directly promises a devastating response in all possible directions: land, sea, air, and cyberspace. That is, Washington's attempt to shift the conflict into a drawn-out, controlled phase of economic pressure is met with Tehran's outright refusal to play by these rules. And finally, I'll add a small but very interesting detail to this whole story of the US war against Iran. The New York Times reports today the wife of US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, former Fox News producer Jennifer Hegseth, has gained significant influence over processes in the Pentagon without holding any official position there. She advises the US Department of War on media strategy and personnel training. On support functions and public speaking, accompanies her husband on official trips and participates in high-level meetings. According to the publication, Hegseth also added his wife to a chat in Signal where US military operations are discussed. And such broad involvement of the Minister of War's wife, Jennifer Hegseth, in discussing military matters has drawn criticism, since she does not hold any official position. And she does not have access to classified information. The Pentagon responds to this simply. They say that the wife of the Minister of War, Pete Hegseth, does not participate in discussions where classified information is discussed. But the very fact that a person without official status or clearance is present in a closed chat, where military operations are being discussed, well, that's just another detail in this overall picture. While the Trump administration acknowledges that the war with Iran is dragging on indefinitely, within the Defense Department itself there are questions about transparency and the decision-making process. The question here is who makes the decisions about war and how? I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.